Good morning to all of you. Thank you, Merlin, for that overly generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be here at the Pennington Biomedical Research Center, which is actually where I work. It's a pleasure to be participating in the second Prader-Willi conference. I was at the first one in Baltimore some 3 years ago, and actually Baltimore is where I came from yesterday, but it was a completely different subject. I had originally thought I would talk about protein metabolism and obesity in relation to growth hormone, which is an important therapeutic agent for Prader-Willi syndrome, but they told me that wasn't my title. I had one of these generic titles, and so you're going to get a more generic lecture, and I will say nothing about that other subject, even though that's what we're currently doing research on. So you won't hear anything about what I actually do, but some relatively general comments about obesity per se. And so this is the title that I was assigned, and this is what we will talk about for a few minutes. And this is the outline of what I will cover during this time. And when I planned this on the plane yesterday, I cut it down to about 20 minutes worth. And then I looked at the program and said, I've got 45 minutes. What am I going to say with a 20-minute talk in 45 minutes? So I spent some time early this morning adding more slides, and since we're now a little shorter, I will jump by a few things a little more rapidly than I might have planned to. So this will go at different paces depending on where we are in the presentation. What I introduced this morning, and where I thought there was a little extra time, was a historical perspective, a very brief one. Many people think that the obesity epidemic began 40 years ago or 30 years ago, 1980, and I wanted to dispel that idea in the first few slides. This is a picture from the Nature article by Conrad in 2008 of the Venus of Holy Fels, a statue that was found in his archaeological work in southern Germany that is about 35,000 years old. And it's clear that obesity has been depicted in artifacts that far back, if not further. We haven't found any older ones, but I think it's possible there are some. The best known of these artifacts is another 10,000 years later. So I've jumped from 35,000 years ago to a little more than 20,000 years. This is the Venus of Willendorf, probably the most famous statuette found in southern Germany, again, about a century before the Venus of Holy Fels. So there clearly are, I suspect, more of these from various ages. But in the Paleolithic period, these are two examples of women who would be depicted as obese. Interestingly, on the previous one, you can see the genitalia are also very distinct and evident on this statue. There is no head. The author said in careful examination, it's clear the head wasn't lost, it just was never carved. So this is the torso of this individual. So I want to jump from the Old Stone Age to the, if this is going to go forward, it's doing a bad thing with jumping around it. Oh, let's see if this works better. No, not better. This projector is not exactly, there you go, that's the one I want. Jump something like 10,000 more years to the beginning of the agricultural period. And when agriculture came in about 10,000 years ago, it dramatically changed the food supply for human beings. The first two figures developed obesity, if that was the model which was used to make those statues, and I think that's a reasonable assumption, on the Paleolithic diet, which is what you could catch or pick. You had to kill animals and eat the diet, which is a very relatively high protein, estimated to be 25 to maybe 30% of calories. It was a moderately high fat diet of similar amounts, with carbohydrates being variable depending on what time of year it was and where you were. With agriculture, this dramatically changed, and our food supply now is about 75% from foods that were not available in the Paleolithic era. And yet in two parts of the world, there are evidence of obesity on more than one kind of diet in over tens of thousands of years. So it's obviously an issue which has a genetic base which can develop in some people under any diet And most of the depictions, as you will see, are of women. This is one from Turkey in the 6th millennium, which is 6,000 years ago. So we've made another big jump. And the final one I wanted to show you, which is not that one, we're skipping slides for some reason in this system. There is one from the Mayans. That's it. There is one Mayan figure from the classic period of the Mayan Stone Age, because they were Stone Age people, depicting what I think all of us would agree was a centrally obese man, and that's unusual. Almost all the other depictions are of females. This is of a male from about 1,000 years ago. So obesity has been with us for a long period of time. It is not a new phenomenon. And I wanted to talk about Hippocrates, because we're now down to 2,500 years ago. And not only was obesity present in Hippocrates' time, but Hippocrates treated patients and described how he did it. If this wants to move forward one slide, let's see if that does it. Yes. Hippocrates' approach to treating obesity is described here. Obese people and those desiring to lose weight should perform hard work before food. That's not bad advice. Meals should be taken after exertion and while still panting from fatigue, and with no other refreshment before meals except only wine. I like that suggestion of his. Diluted and slightly cold. So for 2,500 years, and in all other medical traditions, which I'm not going to illustrate, obesity has been present, and the physicians of that time have used mostly diet and exercise, because that's what there was to treat the problem. So it's not new. It's had treatments that have been going for a long time. I'm going to jump another 2,000 years. Now we're almost into modern times. We're up to 1,600. This is Professor Santorio. Oh boy, this thing's really bad. Professor Santorio, if I get his right picture, there he is, spent most of his professorial career at the University of Padua sitting on this scale, weighing the food he ate, the excreta he had, and he identified insensible perspiration. And his view of treating obesity and other diseases was that you had to modulate insensible perspiration, that if you had too much or too little, you needed to have other ways of handling what we would call fluid balance, with cathartics, with bleeding, and with things that were in medical practice up to the beginning of the 19th century. He was a very clever man. He was at Padua at the same time that Galileo was, and these are two of his instruments. One's a thermometer, which he on the right, and another is a bed for weighing people in a scale. So he was a very clever fellow and used the techniques of his time to great advantage. But I would begin our modern period with William Wadd, an interesting man. He's a surgeon. He was a secretary to the Royal College of Surgeons in London, and this is actually the picture that used to hang there. They've now archived it. It's hidden away somewhere in their files. But he wrote the first very nice, not the first, one of the first very nice monographs about obesity. He was born just at the time of our revolution. He was apprenticed to Sir James Earl at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, Bart's, one of the famous London hospitals. In 1801, he became a member of the College of Surgeons. In 1824, became a counselor. And in 1829, a member of their Court of Examiners. And that's also the year in which he died, because his coach ran away and he jumped out and was killed in the process. But in 1810, 13, and 16, he wrote a little book about treatment of obesity, and he had some cases in it. He was a very good draftsman, and this is one of the patients that he depicted in his little monograph. It's a lovely little book, and the one published in 1839 on comments on corpulency. So I tend to date our modern obesity issue to this book, which was written and describing how common obesity was in England in the early 19th century. Well, we think it's very common now, but remember, if you will, that it's been common in the practice of medicine's views for at least 200 years. So it is not a new problem, but it is still one we have not solved. Diets are likewise not new. Atkins did not come up with the first diet. Banting actually probably deserves that credit. A diet very similar to what Atkins had. He was an undertaker who knew he needed to do something when he found he had to go down the stairs backwards because he couldn't walk down, and he had to have people help him tie his shoes. He was 200 pounds and about 63 years of age when he went on a diet recommended to him by his ear, nose, and throat specialist. And I didn't know they treated obesity, but apparently in the early 19th century, mid-19th century, that was the case. And he lost 50 pounds. And in his little book, which he published on his own expense for the first run because he was so excited about his results, he lost 50 pounds. There's a wonderful graph of his weight loss in this little monograph. Well, this was the first book. It was translated into many languages, widely distributed. It's a very readable little booklet. But he was badly abused by the press, this charlatan. How can a layman have anything important to say about medicine? But nonetheless, the term banting and bantingism appeared as a synonym for weight and weight loss programs in the latter part of the 19th century. There were a number of other diets that I've shown here, all of which are prior to the Great Depression. So dieting and diet books are common. They have been with us for at least 150 years. All right, having said that, that's my historical background. You've now got a perspective. I hope when someone says, this obesity epidemic is really a problem now, and it's really new and we've never seen it before, you can say, no, that's not quite true. There's been obesity around for a long time. So I want to look at the issue of control of why people get obese in two contexts. The inner control system, which is within us, and that larger environmental control system, which has enormous impacts, as I'll try to show you a little bit later in a socioeconomic perspective, not a biomedical one. But let me begin with this model and look at genetic factors. You've had some wonderful genetics talks I saw from the program yesterday, so I will only do a bit of it. And the first one of these is part of the pictures from this wonderful monograph by Boryson about 50 years ago, and it's clear that the fraternal twins on the top are very different compared to the monozygotic identical twins below. And the heritability estimates from their studies and most others using identical twins are about 75%. So it's clearly a common enough disease. The question is whether that might have changed because our environmental factors have changed a lot. And Wardle set out to examine that question with the twins early development study consisting of a little over 5,000 twins in England from 1990 on. So it's 35 years after Boryason's paper. The heritability in her twins was essentially the same as it was in the earlier ones, and in fact in the Newman study in the 1930s on identical twins and obesity. So this is high heritability for obesity for body mass index. The only thing that's higher is height, and that's only a little bit more than body mass index. So it's clear that if you are fat and you have an identical twin, that identical twin has a very high risk of being fat. If you are not fat and you have an identical twin, likewise the risk is not very high. So the genetic influence, it's on body mass index, but it's also on weight circumference, and there are some clear interactions with these because of their associations. There are a lot of genes involved in this genetic basis, and I've taken this figure from Willer showing the effects of increasing numbers of genes identified from the genome-wide association studies, showing that there's about a 1.5 BMI unit if you go from less than 3 to more than 13 of these factors. So genetics clearly underpin what we've been seeing for 30,000 years or so. But there's clearly another environmental component, and that's the family. And I think this plot which Ruth Luce did, which she was here, she talked yesterday, she's still here, because I want to commend her for this wonderful redrawing of Bob Whitaker's data. The blue are the individual status at various ages. Infancy at the top, then age 3 to 5, 5 to 8, And you can see that if you were fat at childhood and you didn't have fat parents, you are not likely to be fat. There's no increased probability of that. However, as you get older and you're fat without fat parents, your probability remains much higher. You can see the odds ratios over here, and in adolescence it's 17.5. That's a very high odds ratio. The one parent versus no parents, or two parents versus no parents, are the yellow and red. You can see that for the younger child, the one or two parent difference is very clear. If you've got both parents who are fat, you've got a very high odds ratio of being fat, independent of what your weight is in infancy. That influence diminishes over the age of these children, so that the child's weight becomes predominant, the parental influence becomes substantially less. I did put in one about the Prader-Willi syndrome and its comparison with a few others, but that's just a summary which you have no doubt seen. And I want to go on to things other than that. Obesity occurs because you have more energy going in over time than you're expending. You're storing that extra carbon as fat, and that's what obesity reflects. So it's a chronic, relapsing disease which has a neurochemical basis. So I wanted to spend a few minutes on intake side and a few minutes on the energy expenditure side, and then to talk about the regulatory components. The food we have available in the United States for consumption, which is what the farmers grow, has been measured by the Department of Agriculture over the last century. And for most of that century, up to 1980, it was fairly constant, with some ups and downs in the wartime and the Depression. But really from about 1910 onward up to 1980, it was something like 3,400 calories a day, give or take a little bit. So the farmers were producing a reasonably constant amount of food per individual. Beginning about 1980, there was an increase in the amount of food being produced by farmers relative to the population. And you can see on a plate waste corrected basis, it's about 400 calories a day, from roughly 2,300 up to 2,700 during this period between 1980 and 2000. So clearly we have a much larger amount of food available for consumption. Most of that excess is consumed. We don't have it going into silos in Kansas or Nebraska. We have it going into silos on people. So what we're doing is producing more food and transferring it to people rather than any other source. And one could say, and I could argue, that part of our problem is agricultural policies which have stimulated this food consumption, which is substantially faster than the growth of the population to absorb it on a weight stable basis, and we've thus stimulated the production of food and the obesity epidemic, while of course the government's also attempting to get us to stop the problem. It's like the tobacco industry issue. They were subsidizing tobacco and trying to get people to stop smoking at the same time. In a sense, we're producing excess food by agricultural strategies and trying to get the obesity epidemic to stop while we're stimulating it with food that is tasty and is cheap because it's subsidized. Therefore, the food industry can make very good tasting foods out of it, and they've clearly demonstrated that. The amount we eat clearly influences fat storage. This is actually the only data of mine you'll see. This was a study where we overfed people at 3 different protein levels, and it's clearly the calories that they were eating per day that was directly related to their weight gain, not the protein in the diets. We had 5, 15, and 25% protein shown in the 3 different colors, and they are not related to the degree of excess weight, but the calorie intake clearly is. So calories are what count. If you eat too many of them and you don't burn them off, you will get fat. So how many calories does this take? There are a number of estimates. These are the USDA's estimates and CDC's estimates of the increased amount of food that is available per day per person. These are 3 other estimates of the amounts that are available. Hill's estimates about 100 calories per day. I think that's probably low. Gortmaker's and Dietz's estimate for children were 150 to 175. that may also be a little low. I think Swinburne's estimate of 500 calories per day at that analysis is probably the best of the analysis. So it's anywhere between 100 and 500 a day excess that it takes to produce the epidemic that we have. And as you can see, the increased food consumption, which we are consuming, is sufficient to account for almost all of this, but maybe not quite all. There are a couple of interesting features about food. Breakfasts do make a difference. If there's one meal in the day I eat, it is breakfast. This is a comparison of adolescents and young adults in the left bar, comparing whether they did or didn't eat breakfast. And you can see if they did eat breakfast compared to those who didn't, the odds ratio of their becoming fat when they were young adults was reduced dramatically. If the adolescents only, not just the younger adults, versus eating breakfast, it's also significantly reduced. So eating breakfast, if you are of that mind, is associated with a substantially lower odds ratio of becoming obese. There's also an interesting study on timing of day, and there are some of these that I haven't put in, but this one's one that fascinated me. It was done on a metabolic unit with some night eaters and some who were not, and with food available over a 3-day period. You can see that the nighttime eaters had a significantly greater weight increase than those who were not eaters at nighttime in the duration of this study. The amount of food we have available, the portion sizes that we buy and serve are directly related to the amount we eat. This is one of Barbara Roll's very nice studies looking at providing 500, 625, 750, or 1,000 calorie portions, and then estimating how much people ate of that. Well, they don't eat it all. They eat about 375 up to 500 calories. So if you double the portion size, you increase your consumption by about 150 calories per day. So the large portion sizes, of which we have many, that would include the large plates that I see in almost every restaurant, will enhance the amount of food you eat off that plate or that serving size. You may not eat it all, but the larger it is, the more of it you will eat. And if calories count, we should have smaller container sizes being made available rather than the humongous ones that we now often have. There are some foods that are more likely to produce weight gain than others. This is the Nurses' Health Study and Physicians' Follow-Up from the New England Journal paper last year. And the ones in orange are the not so good ones, and the ones in greens are the things you should eat. Yogurt and nuts are particularly good. These are weight gains per 4 years in this group of subjects. It went from weight losses in the people who had these healthy foods to substantial weight gains, nearly 1.5 pounds per 4 years in the people who ate a lot of fried potatoes or French fried potatoes. Potato chips and French fried potatoes are clearly not preferred foods for people who have a weight problem. There's just no question that those are not the right kind of foods to be eating. And that's shown again in this study that Paradakul did from data when he was here, comparing the food that you eat on a day in which you had a fast food restaurant meal versus a day in which you did not. So the yellow one is the day that there was fast food eaten, and you can see that it reduces cereal intake, green and yellow vegetable intake, increases fried potato intake by almost twofold, reduces milk intake, and increases soft drinks. And so I'll return briefly to soft drinks in a moment because they are a particularly interesting component of the problem of calories. In fact, I'll do that right here. Beverage intake as soft drinks and fruit drinks have both gone up substantially over the last 50 years. One of the figures not shown here is that the consumption of soft drinks went from 10 gallons per person to 50 gallons per person over the period from 1950 to 2000. That's a 5-fold increase in beverages. And there's a peculiar property to beverages. I'll let you look at a nice big beverage thing. There it is. There's the other half of it. When I sold Coca-Cola, when I was a Coca-Cola truck driver in my youth, that was the size bottle I was delivering to all around the city of Chicago when I was growing up. That's what we're getting today. There's an interesting property of beverages isn't restricted to soft drinks, but since that's the predominant source of beverage we have that's got calories in it, they are not perceived in the same way that solid food is. That is, if you eat 100 calories or drink 100 calories of beverage, you won't reduce your solid food intake by a corresponding 100 calories of food, but you will with solid food. So there's the recognition system for calories in beverages is less sensitive than it is with solid foods. So the beverages tend to be add-on calories and are a major source of the problem for some people. And I'm actually glad to see that one of my professional colleagues, David Allison, who was debated this issue at the Obesity Society, he debated that beverages really didn't make a difference. After the recent papers in the New England Journal said he's changed his mind and that he believes beverages are an important component of the obesity epidemic. And I certainly believe that as well. Let me turn to energy expenditure. I spent a lot of time on intake because I think that's where the predominant driver is, but expenditure is another component. I'm supposed to finish in 2 minutes. That'll be tricky. Merlin, when you want me to shut up, you just say shut up, and I'll be happy to end at any time along the way. This is one of a couple of studies of physical activity. This is a longitudinal study. This is the Pittsburgh component of that in black and white girls during adolescence. You can see that each year as these girls got older, from age 9 up to 18, they gradually decreased their energy expenditure. And for the black girls in blue, there's essentially no spontaneous physical activity other than what they have to do to go to school and back in the last few years of this study. But both black and white girls show this decline during adolescence. It's more prominent in the girls than in boys, but it's present in both sexes. We know that television plays a role in this problem, and I'm going to jump to one other slide from this institution by Tim Church, which does suggest that the changed work environment contributes to the epidemic of obesity, and I'll give you my estimates of numbers in a moment. What they looked at were the patterns of moderate light and sedentary moderate and light activity. You can see in the white that moderate activity between 1960 and 2010 has declined steadily, that sedentary activity has gone up a little bit, and that light activity has gone up more. So our job requirements have changed. Not many people are on the farm anymore. Our big machinery does most of this. It's the service industries that we have, and those don't take much energy, and there's been a clear shift. And my estimates are that about 2/3 to maybe 3/4 of the epidemic is the food intake side, and maybe 1/4 is this shifting work-related energy expenditure. So let me talk about the regulatory system. I said I was going to start and put this diagram together. I'll skip some of this, Merlin, because I want to take the larger view for the last few slides. I'll do this in maybe one slide. Obesity, I think, is clearly a regulated system. And I think one of the clearest and nicest demonstrations is this drug study with rimonabant, where the people in green were assigned before the study began to switch at the end of 1 year to no drug or continue the drug. So that was the randomization. So we're the same group for the first year. But you can see that when the randomizations came into effect and they were randomized to the placebo, the body weight went up, and they reached the same level as the orange placebo group had throughout the trial. Those who continued on the medication maintained a lower body weight, meaning to me that this drug can manipulate the set point or the response elements in this system by about 10%. And drugs that produce weight gain, some of the psychoactive drugs, can increase it by about the same amount. So it looks to me as though there's a roughly 10% variable response in the regulatory system, being able to go up about 10% or down about 10% by various manipulations of this type. Excuse me. I missed a slide in here. Boy, oh boy. Let's go back one. There it is. What is all that nice, interesting text over there? I don't really know. Anyway, this is the food intake regulatory system. You can read the text. I'm not even sure I know what it says. But the point is, it's got a central component at the top. It's got some feedback regulatory messages from various organs which regulate the energy intake and energy output. And what I wanted to share with you was bits of a talk I heard yesterday at Johns Hopkins about the medial forebrain pleasure circuit. In 1964, a man named Olds, this is back in my early days of my career, and Milner put electrodes in the ventral tegmental area of rodents, which were electrodes that they could self-stimulate if they wished. They had a little bar to press them, and they could press as often as they liked. And what they found was that these animals would consistently and persistently stimulate this area of the brain, that it was a rewarding center. And they found that these animals would, if the bar to press it was over here and there was an electric shock field in between, they'd run over that electric shock field to be able to press that bar. And they found that if they put the rats in the cage with a receptive female, they'd run over and start pressing their bar and ignore the female. It's a more powerful drive than sex. It's more powerful, it allows you to overcome a lot of pain. They found that in the female rats that had new pups, the female would abandon her pups to press this bar. So it tells you that this ventral tegmental dopaminergic system that's connected to the nucleus accumbens is an extremely powerful reward system, and one that is phylogenetically very old. Dr. Linden was telling us about the C. elegans, which is this little tiny worm, also appears to have dopaminergic fibers, which can be shown to fire during some feeding responses in these little fellows as well. So it's an ancient system, a powerful system. It's involved in all of the addictive drugs and many addictive behaviors. Gambling, for example, is one where this system is activated. So I have a couple of points about it, if these come along. Stimulation of this area releases dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, which is a pleasurable response. And as I've said, rodents will do a great deal to get this pleasurable stimulation. The circuitry is activated by addictive drugs, alcohol, nicotine, and food. And that's where we come back to us. And Roland, that's actually the question I was starting to lead up to in my question about MRI studies. And because is this dopaminergic system activated, or is it basically at high levels in the Prader-Willi syndrome? I don't know the answer to that. Obese people have small activation of the pleasure center with the taste of food, but more stimulation of the dopaminergic system with anticipation of food. Very different from normal weight people. It means that they crave the food more, but they like it less. It doesn't produce the same level of stimulation. So to get the same reward from the dopamine system, they require more of it. So it's this liking, wanting issue which this system plays as an important component of our system. The rest of the, the last one was that this system is activated by sugars and fats, which may have some addictive properties, but that their activation is super additive. That when you have fat and sugar together, you get a greater response of the dopaminergic pleasure reward system than when you have either one in comparable amounts alone. So it's a very important system. The feedback regulatory system is controlled in the arcuate nucleus. And Merlin, for time, I'm going to just pass over this. I assume you know all these things, so I'm just going to jump down a bit. The second component of the system is the peripheral signals. I've taken this slide from Hans Rudi Bertaux's work. He does beautiful slides. This is the GI tract on the right side where all those nice little peptides are lined up. There are systems that go up to the hypothalamus where this ventral tegmental area is, among others, that have important relations to food intake. For time, I'm not going to talk about any of them because I want to do something else, not even leptin. Oh, terrible. The fat is an endocrine organ and makes a whole variety of products. I used to have only a few on the slide, but I now have a lot, and they're in a variety of categories. There are metabolic products, there's immune system, signals, which we'll come back to in a moment, and matrix messages. In order to change fat cell size, you have to modify the matrix, and there are expression of genes involved with collagen, for example, that are readily measurable. Let's see. There's a clear inflammatory component to obesity related to these cytokines, which may be related to the microbiota in our gut. And there are two major groups, the bacteroidetes and the firmicutes, which are 99% of this set of organisms, which are 10 times as numerous as our cells in our body. So there's 10 times as many bacteria in our gut as there are cells in the body. They seem to be able to modulate our physiological responses in several ways by modifying energy homeostasis, probably by enhancing the digestion of fiber in the colon, by altering gut permeability, which I think is an important component of this. And I want just to drop down to this slide. This is a figure I took from a review that suggesting that one of the ways in which the microbiome works in the gut is to alter the permeability, allowing lipopolysaccharide, which is the inflammatory component of these organisms, to enter the circulation, and that the inflammatory responses we see may well be a reflection of the altered gut permeability influencing both the inflammatory system as well as some of the metabolic system. So I think this is an important component of this regulatory system whose final values we don't entirely know. Environmental modulators were the last part of this, and I did want to spend a moment on these. There are a variety of them. This is the David Allison and McAllister's list of sleep debt, maternal age, intrauterine environment, maternal smoking, infective agents, associated sorting and matings, medications, temperature regulation, exercise, and food abundance. And I've talked about some of those already. Breastfeeding is clearly important. This is a dose response one. The longer these infants were breastfed, up to 12 months, the lower their percentage of obesity was when they entered school at age 6. Maternal smoking is important, and it manifests itself out into the early adult life. If a mother smoked during pregnancy, that child is at greater risk for obesity than if they did not. Even if they stopped after the first trimester, which is the blue bar in the middle, they still had most of this impact present. Sleep time in infancy is also an important predictor of your weight when you enter school. Kids should get more sleep. You should not have televisions in children's rooms because or computers actually, because it keeps them up later, and if they don't get enough sleep, they're at higher risk. I wanted to present a few of the slides on endocrine disruptors. Our food industry and others add a lot, the pesticide industry, fertilizer industry, add lots of chemicals to our environment. And as the information accumulates, a number of these influence body weight and or reproductive system. Organochlorines, the polychlorinated phenols are one of these, in fact, as are the organobromines, but they're also bisphenol A, which has a number of receptors, particularly estrogen 1, organotins, organophosphates, phthalates, and heavy metals. And I suspect we will find that these are playing a larger role in modulating our early environmental exposures. What mothers are eating is crossing the placenta, and many of those because these are very lipid-soluble compounds, entering brain, and the brain in utero is a very responsive organ, and it can be programmed, and I suspect these are playing more of a role than we suspect. Let me jump past medications. The built environment plays a role in how fat kids are. This is the odds ratio of being overweight and the number of recreational facilities in your neighborhood. The more you have, the greater your odds of not being overweight. So the environment in which people are growing up, whatever their genetic makeup may be, is playing a role. Food prices, I'm going to pass because I want to give you what $1 will buy, but I don't want to do that. Obesity is clearly contagious in the sense that if you are fat and you have relatives, friends, you will influence their risk. This is the Framingham study data of Christakis, that if your chance of obesity is increased by 57% if a friend becomes obese, 40% if an adult sibling becomes obese, and 37% if a spouse becomes obese. So there's a lot of interplay between the obesity in one person and the obesity in their relatives. And this is the map they have of that interactions and nodal spread of obesity. But the one I hadn't seen until recently is the last one I want to mention, and that's the relationship between income disparity and obesity. This is a plot of rising income disparity. It's the difference between the bottom and top 20% of the population's earning capacity. So the greater that discrepancy, the farther out on the right side of this abscissa you are. And this is the percent obese in the populations in question. Note that most of the English-speaking countries are on the far right side of this. It's interesting that the income disparity in the English-speaking countries, in contrast to most others, is much higher. Not clear why that is, but USA, UK, Australia, and New Zealand are all out here. The only other one is Portugal on this side. At the other end are most of the Scandinavian countries and Japan. But this isn't just an issue across countries. It's an issue within states in the United States. And I wanted you to look at where Louisiana is. That's where we're standing today. Only New York, with its gazillionaires, is higher than we are. That's not a good sign. And note that our neighbors, Mississippi and Alabama and Tennessee, are also high on this discrepancy list. So this is exactly the same inequality spread. It's the top versus bottom 20% versus the percent who are obese in each of these states. So there's clearly a socioeconomic environment leading to obesity independent of whatever these calories are. We don't have the same different supermarkets around the country, but we do have differences in what people have to spend in various levels of their society. So I think I'm at the end, Merlin. I apologize for, we did get almost my 45 minutes in, but I didn't plan to do that yesterday. I'd cut it way down. You wouldn't have seen any of this stuff yesterday. You got it today, so I apologize for that. Obesity is an ancient problem. I hope I've made that point very clear. A model for regulation of energy stores includes environmental and individual factors. And although we say it's an individual's responsibility, I hope I've shown you that there are clearly powerful environmental factors that influence how those genes and individual responses work. Genetic factors are involved. Food intake is a major driver. I think 3/4 or more of it's that. Reduced energy expenditure plays a subsidiary role. The central regulatory system is important, and I think this pleasure-reward system, the ventral tegmental area and the dopamine system is very important indeed. Finally, environment modulates many of these factors, as I hope you've seen. So if I can get this one slide, which doesn't want to come up in the middle. There's one in the middle there. Come on up with your last slide. Nope, doesn't like that slide. Ah, there it is. The human body is composed of head and limbs and torso, kept slim by gents, at great expense by ladies even more so. Thank you, Ogden Nash. So that's my presentation for you this morning.